Our Indigenous Solidarity Statement. We stand in solidarity with the Puyallup, Nisqually, Coast Salish, and all Indigenous people. Indigenous people have stewarded these lands since the beginning of time and continue to do so today. We uplift Indigenous voices within our community. We support national development for Indigenous people. We honor the multitudes of Indigenous identity, including queer, two-spirit, and Black folks. Many of their ancestors were abducted and enslaved by a system that continues to this day under the 13th Amendment. Boo! Boo. We demand reparations. We demand an end to the ongoing genocides. We demand the return of land and natural resources. We cannot revitalize ecosystems worldwide without Indigenous sovereignty from Puyallup to Palestine. Woo! So today, we're going to go over an overview of what this presentation is about. First, we're going to touch on environmental racism, specifically here in Tacoma. What are the material conditions where we're at? Next, we're going to talk about Indigenous sovereignty. As I just said, we're on the land of the Puyallup people. All of this is native land, and therefore we should also be fighting for and demanding full Indigenous sovereignty, as it's inseparable from climate justice. And then we will close with talking about the Climate Commission, our current campaign, and the tactic that we've been using about air monitors. So stay tuned for that. And I will be one of your presenters today. We also have the lovely Gemini, co-founder of Climate Alliance. And I'll welcome her up to introduce herself. Thank you, Gemini.
Okay. Let me go on the next slide already, right? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Okay. Howard, Ahe, Gemini, Raja Abra Minkshe. My name is Gemini. I'm a proud member of the Osage Nation, founding member of CAS. Really grateful to be here. Huge gratitude to everyone who took time on their Sunday morning to be here. There's a lot of places you could have been, but you chose to be here to give back to community, give back to the earth, give back to Indigenous communities, and learn something in the process. So thank you again. So let's jump into it. I do a lot of public speaking, and I think I'm pretty good at it, but I'm like 8 months pregnant, and pregnancy brain is real, so I'm going to grab my phone and make sure I don't forget anything important for my notes. Okay. So environmental racism. This is probably a term that a lot of people have heard before. It was coined in the 80s by this guy named Chavez, who was a church community leader. He's a black man and a church community leader, and it was popularized by this guy, Dr. Robert Bullard. And this is, coming out of the repression of the Black Panthers in the 60s and 70s. This is coming out of the repression of the American Indian movement, also in the 70s. And by the 80s, there's this phenomenon that's been going on for a long time, where, dumps and hazardous waste and cancer-producing chemicals and landfills are all being built, not just anywhere. They're being built on and near Black and brown communities, on and near reservations, on and near thriving centers of Black culture in particular. But this is not a unique phenomenon to Black and Indigenous people. All people of color and oppressed nationalities were subject to this. And this is something that was seen time and time again. And so, to identify something, it's good to name it. And so we name it environmental racism. So you can probably bet that if this happened everywhere, it happened in Tacoma, and you'd be correct. Can I get the next slide? And sorry, making sure I don't forget anything. Here we go. One other thing that I wanted to say is, I'll tie it into this. So, in Tacoma, there are myriad examples of environmental racism. Tacoma is a border town. Anybody know what a border town is? You guys heard this term? Yeah, what's a border town? Somebody want to tell me? Aoife?
It's a town that borders a reservation, and this is often followed by heightened violence against Indigenous peoples.
Yeah, absolutely. Heightened violence, and in the case of Tacoma, heightened pollution, right? Every piece of land that isn't, reservation land is bordered by polluting projects like the tide flats, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So here's just some more examples in Tacoma specifically. The South Tacoma Mega Warehouse. Who's heard of that? Boo. Boo is right. This was built in a historically redlined neighborhood. If you don't know what that is, we're going to come back to it. This neighborhood has like double the black population by percentage than the city at large. It's almost 20% black where they built this warehouse. It's on top of our only aquifer, which obviously negatively impacts salmon and orcas and Indigenous peoples' traditional way of living, so, that ties in. And, of course, it brings tons of traffic and air pollution. And these are not just like, oh, man, air pollution, that's bad because it, hurts my lungs, it's kind of hard to see outside. This kills people. This has real material destructive impacts on people's lives. The life expectancy difference between the most white and wealthy areas of Tacoma and the poorest and most diverse areas is 25 years. 25 years life discrepancy. That's an entire generation, right? That's the difference between growing up and knowing your grandparents or not, right? This is serious. This is not just for the sake of the planet. I mean, it is, but it has real material consequences for us. Another example that I brought up is like the tide flats. I mean, look at this picture. You can see the people's houses, bordering up against the place, and then all of that gray stuff is industry. This used to be the traditional homelands and areas of the Puyallup people from all over. They would come here. There's an old saying that says, when the tide went out, the table was set, because there was so much food in abundance, and all of that has been built over and destroyed. We're going to hear an interview from Dakota Case later today. And this area in particular, the Northwest Detention Center, which is built in this industrial zoning on the reservation, is on his family's original allotment, right? So this is not, bygone era, like history past. This is like recent history. Which brings us to the Northwest Detention Center, right? Like, of course, if you have so much pollution, there's going to be, cleanup to do, right? Do people know what a Superfund site is? Yeah, can somebody just tell me what a Superfund site is?
It's a site designated by the EPA that says that this area is extremely polluted and we can't hear you.
I'll say it again into the mic. Yeah, so it's an area designated by the EPA that says this area is so polluted, the federal government is required to get involved to help clean it up. Of course, they don't always do a great job. In the case of the Northwest Detention Center, they just put some dirt on top of it and called it good, and then they locked up the people that they violently and often illegally arrest into the Northwest Detention Center and put them right on top of that pollution. The pollution, land that is deemed unfit for human habitation. They built a detention center on it. Come on, man. And that also obviously has, racial implications. So let's go to the next slide. I think I'm cropping up on time. So the history and legacy of environmental racism in Tacoma doesn't come from nowhere, right? This stuff doesn't happen magically. It happens because of specific history, specific policy, specific actions and ideas that people have had in the past. And one of those, particularly heinous, is redlining. Who here has anybody here not heard of redlining? Okay, so I don't see hands. It says everybody knows what redlining is. So, just for the sake of completeness, redlining was a practice where they deemed certain neighborhoods as hazardous, and you can bet what they based that on. It was race, right? Neighborhoods that were black and brown were hazardous. Neighborhoods that were white were not. And you can see the impact of this today, right? Oh, and then of course there were like legal ramifications for that. If you were hazardous, you couldn't get a loan. Get real, you can't own your house. You're going to be over-policed, underserved, etc. And so they're like systemic contributors to what we see today, which is this equity index here. The darker colors are high equity. You live longer, you have better jobs, you have better education, you have a better life. The white areas are the area in the thing, I guess like tan, is very low. That means you live less long, right? Your children are sicker, your schools are worse, your lives, the quality of your life is negatively impacted. And this includes things like pollution, of course. So, do people know like roughly where the reservation is? Yeah, it's this big white area right there. I mean, where it says Fife. This is a big part of the reservation. And then the tide flats, it says moderate because if you see it butts up into where we are right now, and so it includes all of these like apartment complexes and stuff. I have a sneaking suspicion that if they drew the lines a little different, it would not be like that. So, you know, we could have a slide on gerrymandering, but that would take me even more over time than we already are. So let's go to the next slide just to really drive this point home. This map on the right is the black population in Tacoma right now by percent. So, oh man, I wish I had a stick. Here, let's see. This right here is where they're building the mega warehouse. 19.8% black, right? You know, you can see Hilltop, 21.5% black, right? So this is just like the demographics. Now you can see redlining, right, on the left. If we superimpose these, we can see the areas that are formerly redlined are still black today, right? That you know, people who have historically been oppressed don't disappear, right? They still live here. And they are now experiencing worse life conditions than their counterparts because of these policies. If we just go back one more slide really quick, just to drive this home, here is the equity index again. And you can see that it's a little confusing because the colors are reversed. On the other slide, like dark, like orange is like more black people live there. And then here you can see this very low area here. Where they want to build the mega warehouse. Lowest possible equity score, right? This strip here and then Hilltop, it's the lowest possible or very low equity score, right? Not a coincidence. Not a coincidence. This is achieved through environmental racism, right? This is achieved through building a highway that cuts through your neighborhood. Can anybody think of a highway that cuts through some neighborhoods in Tacoma? The 16, yeah. What else? The I-5 cuts right through the reservation. Not a coincidence. So yeah, that's the point that I really wanted to hammer home. The last thing I'll say is the PSE LNG that was illegally built on Puyallup land. Anybody here not familiar with the PSE LNG? Okay, so Puget Sound Energy, liquid natural gas. But don't be confused that there's nothing natural about it. This is the gas that like turns on your stove at your house if you have like a gas stove. I think Jamie's going to talk more about this, but it's super polluting, super bad, super dangerous, built illegally on Puyallup land. And they decided during the lawsuit against them, they were sued. Oh no, I'm conflating things, I'm sorry. Sorry, 1 second. Anyway, I'll talk about this in the next section, actually. Yeah, I'll pass it over to Jamie. I think I hit. There's some stuff I missed, but I'll cover it in the next section. So Jamie's going to talk more about the PSE LNG, but this is an example of this, right? Like, this kills people and worsens their quality of life. Thanks.
Yay, give it up for Gemini. Okay, so now that we understand a little bit more about the conditions here in Tacoma on the reservation, let's talk about Indigenous sovereignty. Let's start. What is sovereignty, right? What does this word mean? It's the authority of a state to govern itself and its land, right? The Puyallup tribe are their own nation unfortunately under the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Boo. However, they do have sovereignty. It's of course undermined for the reasons that we've talked about and more that we'll get into with the Climate Commission. But this is also exercised or upheld by the Medicine Creek Treaty. So who's familiar with treaties? Yeah, okay. So for those that aren't, a treaty is a formal, legally binding written agreement between sovereign states, also known as the supreme law of the land. So when settlers first arrived here, and actually Nisqually, Sequalichu is the site of the very first settlement here on the West Coast. Obviously the land was not theirs, right? But they wanted it to be. And so they needed entities, right? Other sovereign states to negotiate with. And so actually the Coast Salish people identified more by watershed than by the tribes that we know them today, right? It was Governor Stevens that helped negotiate this treaty, who said, okay, you're Puyallup, you're Nisqually, right? So that we can have a document on file, an agreement on file. I will say, it says signed on December 26th. I'm going to also say allegedly.
Yep.
If you were at our field trip to the Billy Frank Nisqually Wildlife Refuge last year with Climate Catastrophe Ground Zero, you would have heard Robert Satayacum talk about how on the treaty itself there's an X where the signature is. He was sharing that the X could have been more so like, no, we don't agree, right? Actually, this is not something that we're signing our name on, right? So we'll say allegedly, but this agreement was between a lot of the local tribes and the so-called United States. And this treaty granted over 2 million acres of land to the U.S. What did the tribes get in exchange? 3 tiny reservations, only about 1,200 acres each. Shame.
Shame.
Also within the treaty, however, does recognize the rights of traditional native fishing and hunting rights, right? Able to sustain their traditional way of life. But we've seen attacks on this. So let's talk about that. Let's go to the next slide and talk about some of the attacks on these rights. Who knows about fish war? Show of hands. So the fish war, we've done some screenings on. There are some great documentaries out there that you can learn more if you'd like to after this. But essentially it was the attack on native fishermen and fisherwomen exercising their rights, mostly by non-native commercial and residential or recreational fishermen. This was after World War II. They were seeing the salmon population start to decrease, right? As pollution was rising, and as more non-native fisher people were just taking from the river, right? They were seeing how much this natural resource could produce profit for them, right? Very different from how traditionally salmon are fished, right? To nourish us, to also then use the other pieces for other traditional practices. And so the Puyallup people, along with a ton of allies, established fish encampments on the bank of the Puyallup River, but they faced really violent police repression. People were dragged through the mud, people were shot at with tear gas bullets, but they fought back, right? People were there fighting back for their rights. I got to attend the fish war event with the tribe a couple weekends ago, and they talked about how they did bring, arms to their camp as protection for themselves. They did, however, they were strategic though, right? When the police started to come, those folks moved their arms out of the camp. That way they wouldn't be targets. But they were still targeted, right? The police were still raining down on them. And this fight not only had consequences for here in Puyallup, in Washington, nationally, the Bolt decision at the Supreme Court level upheld their treaty rights in 1974. The Bolt decision said, Native people, due to treaties, the supreme law of the land, are allowed to fish and exercise their traditional way of being, and they get 50% of the fish, no matter what, and then the other 50, settlers and non-native fishermen need to, divide amongst themselves, and that made people angry, right? Because they felt entitled to this resource. So I could go on and on about that. Really recommend that folks go and do some more homework on that. But I also want to touch on national development. So some other ways that sovereignty is undermined, is attacked, is through practices like boarding schools, family policing, police crimes, of course, like we talked about with the border towns, disproportionate incarceration, of course, forced assimilation, repression of culture and history, the pollution that we've been talking about. All of these things undermine national development, right? The ability to develop your next generation, keep the elders within your community healthy, right? And able to pass on those traditions. Also, the sovereignty and self-determination of the tribes, right? If people are being snatched up by the police or killed, right, by whomever, and they're not getting justice, do you really have full say over how you're being governed? Right? No, that's completely undermined. And so also wanted to touch on the PSC LNG that Jem and I started talking about. So yeah, this was a long fight, and the facility did start operating in 2022. And it poses serious risks, right? If there's an earthquake or a fire, the blast zone is 20 miles? So very, very dangerous. And of course, any houses that have this gas being siphoned to their house, that's also at risk. So yeah, a lot more to say there. And we probably will be talking more about this upcoming in our campaign, so stay tuned. But I also want to highlight, the resistance, right? I started talking about the resistance of the fish war. Can I get the next slide, please? But really want to drive home, that people have been fighting back on this land since they've been attacked, right? Since these attacks have started, since primitive accumulation, and since capitalism and imperialism have really taken over. So over 60 arrests happened. They also arrested kids at Fish War. There were some, teenagers there that were fighting for their rights that they also arrested. Also, while doing research for this, I found out something I've heard before but just really hit home. Billy Frank Jr. was arrested over 60 times for exercising his rights by fishing on the water. Arrested just for fishing, just for practicing his way of life. Shame is right. With the PSC LNG fight, about 12 people were arrested supporting the Puyallup tribe in this fight against the city permitting this project. One of those people is here today. We have Marilyn, who's going to say some words later on. Give it up for Marilyn. And the tribe filed a lawsuit, but the court sided against them, saying that since this was slag, newly brought in land that wasn't there when the treaty was signed, that actually the tribe doesn't have the say over that. We don't think that that's correct, right? This is still the reservation. This is still Puyallup land, and they should have full sovereignty to decide what is or isn't on their land. And we're going to see a video from Dakota shortly here about his arrest as well, Dakota with the Water Warriors. But first, just wanted to mention the Block the Boat in 2023. Who was at Block the Boat? Yeah, shout out to y'all. So the Water Warriors and allies were showing solidarity with the Palestinian struggle for sovereignty and self-determination, right? We have the same enemy, imperialism, capitalists, right? And also, obviously, it's their water. So why? It's not one ethical to be transporting weapons of genocide anywhere, right? But especially in sovereign waters, right? So let's go ahead and pull up that video from Dakota, and it's about 3 minutes long, hearing about his experience being arrested and what his fight means. Oh, start it at.
Oh, I was supposed to start it there?
Yeah, 358.
Sorry, I thought we were like. He was already queued up. Oh, God. Perfect. Good enough. All right.
And we had talked about it, and we came to that point that we're protecting our sovereignty. You know what I mean? That's exactly what it came down to that night. Is we was protecting our sovereignty. You know what I mean? And exercising our sovereignty. And if you know what sovereignty means, that's the tribe's right to govern itself and govern its own land and free will to do business with merchants. And so that's what it came down to, is we said we had to protect our sovereignty. When our tribal council finds that they are in violation of laws on our own reservation, and the city of Fife is well within our reservation boundaries, that should be law. That should be law on a sovereign nation land. We're still hosting the United States government. As First Nation people, we're still hosting the United States government. You know, we had to protect our sovereignty that night. So we came to the decision that there's tribal members right here. We're going to have each tribal member block off the road. You know, there was 4 of us at first, and it was me, Chester Earl, Anna Bean, and my mom and my brother. So we barricaded across the road, and like my brother was saying, there was 6 trucks that I had originally stopped. You know what I mean? They didn't want to be confrontational. And so finally, the 6th or 7th one came up, and he acted like he was going to run me down, you know? So I stood my ground, and I wanted to be ran over, and if that's what it takes for awareness to happen, you know, that's what I feel like should happen. You know, if it comes to them assault me, and we're still peaceful, and we're still prayerful, which I proved that night by, you know what I mean, just being arrested and being and drug off, you know, that's what it was going to take. And the tribal police had jumped up on his window and banged on his window and got him to stop, and they arrested me. You know, and I'm standing there and I'm walking away, and I'm walking away, and I'm like, yep, all right, boom, all right, we're going to go to jail, and we're going to get this through, and we're going to stay in there, we're going to fast. You know what I mean? After I read Dick Gregory's quote, I wanted to stay in jail and fast, you know what I mean, to get awareness even more raised, you know. And I'm sitting in there, and I'm just like, all right, cool, I'm going to have to get ready for this time sitting in jail. And I look over my shoulder, and here's my brother Chester Earl right behind me, and I'm just like, right on, bro, yep, let's go to jail. And so we get in there, and you know, the Fife police had asked me, he goes, do you regularly get arrested on these protests and these rallies? I said, no, this is my first time. And he just looked at me and goes, so did you do it for media attention? I was just like, just know you started the shitstorm, bro. And he just looked at me like, fuck, what did I do? And, you know, to me, they violated our sovereignty, you know? And that's exactly what we was protecting that night, is our sovereignty. And when we went to the Fish Wars a couple days, or the very next day, I think it was, went to the Fish Wars Remembrance Days, you know what I mean? I looked at them elders, and them elders are original water warriors, you know? They was out here getting beat by game and fish wardens and arrested out here on the thing. And I was sitting amongst them, and I was just like, God, you know what I mean? I'm sitting amongst people that actually fought for their rights. You know what I mean? They fought for our rights. They fought for our sovereignty. And that was close to 60 years ago.
Yeah, so we got Dakota's permission to
60
share.
years ago, why are we still fighting for our sovereignty?
To share this video. This is on Native Daily Network's website if you want to watch the whole thing. I also see Patricia just got here. Welcome, Patricia, another water warrior. We're going to go ahead and just finish up the last section of our slides, and then Patricia, if you'd like to share some words, we'd love to have that as well. So I'm going to pass it back to Gemini for the last section of our presentation.
Okay. Yay. Okay, so, you know, we talked about in our first section with environmental racism, didn't happen for no reason, right? It happened because of bad policy, because of bad actors, because of things that happened in the past, because of redlining, right? And this is something that is continuing today. Bad policy and bad practices are continuing to allow environmental racism to ravage our community and kill us at unbelievable rates, right? So how things currently stand is we have a climate commission in Tacoma that can't do anything. It has no power. All it can do is say, hey, pretty please, will you not build a giant bomb on the reservation? And then as long as the city and the developers say, nah, then they can go ahead and do whatever they want. And they're not beholden to they don't follow the regulations that exist. They don't follow the rules that they're supposed to follow. And when we take them to court, they use every possible loophole and slimy, conniving thing that they can possibly get away with. Just for an example, when we were fighting the mega warehouse, this is like right when I started meaningfully organizing in Tacoma, Earth Justice had taken Bridge Industrial, the company behind the warehouse, to court. And they decided in those court hearings that they were not allowed to talk about race. They were not allowed to talk about the equity index, all those maps, all of those demographics, all of the life expectancy, everything we looked at. They said, you can't consider that when we're looking at whether or not we should be allowed to build a warehouse in your neighborhood. And so we lost that court case, right? And it's because of the bull crap that they pull. We need to change the way that this stuff is run. We need a strong climate commission that has legal precedence so that next time we take them to court, they can't use these loopholes and they can't get away with this crap that they've been getting away with. Which, again, what they're doing is already illegal because it's in blatant violation of the Bolt decision. But when we have more people power behind us, the stronger we are. So if we can get to the next slide. If we were to win this kind of climate commission, when we are to win the kind of democratic, people-powered, meaningful, strong climate commission that we want, we have a lot to win. The people of Tacoma will actually be empowered. Right now, the city manager makes all of the decisions. People vote for the mayor and they think the mayor gets to decide stuff. It's not true. It's mostly the city manager. And a strong climate commission would circumvent this, right? If worded correctly. It would help us enforce tribal sovereignty, in particular the Bolt decision, which is already the supreme law of the land, right? One of the things that Jamie talked about, that the implications of the Bolt decision is that for Indigenous people to continue to live in their traditional way and fish for salmon, there have to still be salmon. If you kill all the salmon, you're in violation of the treaty rights, right? And so the pollution, the air pollution, the water pollution that they continue to do is in violation of the Bolt decision, and there's precedence for that. So it puts us in a very strong legal position when fighting for that. And then lastly, we'll be able to meaningfully enforce the regulations that exist, like shutting down blatantly illegal projects like the PSE LNG and the Northwest Detention Center. But we need a lot to be able to do this, right? The Bolt decision gives us a lot of power, but we also need data. We need information. It's not enough the city doesn't listen to us, right? They don't listen to themselves, or they're going to listen to us. But we want to be able to show to our community, to the people, what's at stake, what's happening. And one way that we can do that is through community-owned and controlled air quality monitors. So how things currently stand is that the Department of Ecology won a settlement against Bridge Industrial for $8.9 million. And they're supposed to use that to clean the air and install air monitors. Well, it's been a year, and we haven't seen anything. On their website it says, we're asking for public input. Where? Where are you asking? Because I'm out here and I don't see you guys, right? And then also, like, the 8.9 million works out to like $200 per person in South Tacoma alone. So it's like, that's how much our lives are worth. That's how much 25 years of our lives are worth, $200 to them. So we need to take things into our own hands. As they currently stand, because of like redlining and other racist practices, air quality in South Tacoma and in other places is much worse than in like the north end where there's a bunch of trees. We could talk about tree canopy, etc. And again, this has real meaningful impacts, right? Black children in the United States are 8 times more likely to die from asthma. Shame is right. Asthma kills people. And I would, if I had statistics on how many indigenous and black and brown people in Tacoma have been killed by air quality, I would give it to you, but that data doesn't exist. They do not track this, right? And so we have to rely on data at the national level where they do track more stuff. And some places say 16,000 people a year in the U.S. die from wildfire smoke and implications, right? Again, often we think about air quality as like a quality of life thing, like, oh, it's just a little uncomfortable. This kills people. So we have built 2 air quality monitors. Where's Mark? Give it up for Mark. And we're currently working on the infrastructure that we need to deploy those and collect the data that we need to be in the best possible position to fight back, right? Armed with data, armed with facts that nobody can deny. So there's one more slide, which I think is just talking about what we would get from air quality monitors. Yes, okay, sorry. So, what do you say? If you want something done right, you gotta do it yourself. There are a bunch of air quality monitors in Tacoma, but they don't belong to us. They belong to this company called Purple Air, and it's like totally proprietary. So like right now, the information is public, but they can take it away at any second that they want. It doesn't belong to us. So we use this data when we can, and of course it helps. But we're in a better position when we own these monitors ourselves. And then also, when we own the monitors, we can move them around, right? And we get to decide where they are. And so we can go to, the Northwest Detention Center on public land and collect air data. We can go to, I just bought a house and it's right next to the mega warehouse, right? And we can monitor the air there so that, when the city is like, oh, you're overreacting or it's not that big of a deal, we can show that's not true, right? The air quality monitors put us in a good position to fight for a climate commission. A strong climate commission is how we can fight for and win better indigenous sovereignty, fight back against environmental racism, and win the future that we deserve. Because we might not win everything that we fight for. We put up some really big fights against the PSE LNG, which you'll hear more about. Against, the mega warehouse, which they're still building. But nothing happens if we don't fight. Everything we win is because we fought for it.
Right.
So I don't know about you guys, but I want to keep fighting. So I'll pass it back off to Jim. Thank you.
Yay, give it up for Gemini one more time. Thank you, Jem. So now I'd like to invite up Patricia with the Water Warriors to share whatever you would like to share about the struggle for Indigenous sovereignty and your fight in that. And let's give it up for Patricia and the Water Warriors in general. Thank you so much for all your hard work.
Hello, everybody. If you don't know me, my name is Patricia Gonzalez. I don't really prepare big speeches just because I was always taught, whatever's on your heart is what you're supposed to share. And just listening to, a lot of the things that kind of brought me back to the beginning. And especially seeing Gemini pregnant, when I first started, I had just found out after our first water action that I was 4 months pregnant. And it was kind of one of the things that really, really brought me into the movement, because speaking about the factual part and the statistics and, the science and the air, everything it's so needed. But at the same time, I always like to kind of bring everybody's mindset and your sight into what that looks like for us as Indigenous people in modern day. So just speaking upon, being pregnant, one of the first things that drew me in was, when we were first learning about the science, and because we usually go off, the teachings, the stories, the knowledge of what we were passed down. So to hear it on such a factual side was a little different. But to hear that one of the statistics and rates that we were talking about was stillborn, and miscarriages. And if you notice on one of our first No LNG shirts, that was one of the points, and that was my point, was that it kills babies, in many stages, whether it be when they're grown up or while they're being created. And that's such a sacred time. We all talk about how sacred that time is in the womb, what the mother feels, what she experiences, all of these emotions, all of these spiritual things that happen, ceremonies that you go to, everything that you're a part of. That's what your baby takes in. That's each little piece that your baby is, growing with. And so hearing that, it scared me. I already, had children. I'm a foster parent to my nieces and nephews. And that part was enough for me to say, okay, I got to do something about it. Just to hear that just fracking in your community can cause high rates of stillborn and can cause miscarriages, can cause issues, all ranges in between. That was scary for me, watching all of the children that I already have to watch after. And we already struggle through so much, talking about all of these targeted communities, because that's what they are. The governments, these plans, these, facilities, these industrial sites, they target Indigenous communities, they target Black communities, brown communities, and even low-income non-Indigenous communities. If you can't fight back, or they think you can't fight back, or they have enough information on you not to fight back in one way or the other. And they know for us, our weak spot is our kids. So on a regular basis, we help or want to be involved with environmental justice, because that's part of social justice. Is also, speaking again about how it's broken down in scientific terms and numerology and, all the data. We've always been taught this. We've always been taught how we're targeted, or, through our stories. So it's another way to really just kind of relate to each other. You guys are talking about the same thing that we've always been talking about, how important the salmon are, how important the water is, but also how important the next generation is, and so that's something that we constantly think about. Like, Donnie, my youngest, you see him running around everywhere. We don't really have the opportunity to, go without bringing him everywhere. You'll always see all of us with our kids. And it's not only because of, possibilities for childcare. It's also safe places. Because, like in that documentary, you heard Dakota talking about how some of our elders were fighting the same fight, were the original warriors that we followed. But they also had their kids with them, and it wasn't just because they didn't have childcare. It was because there are so many traumatized people, and that is what these facilities count on. Yeah. That's what these organizations count on, targeted people. They see your pain, they see your hurt, and instead of offering money to help you, they bury you deeper so that you can't get up to fight. And so for us, that looks like our education system isn't up to par. The participation trophies that we get from the state or from the government of, oh, okay, well, at least you're involved, at least you're doing something, and it's all a part of their plan. And so then we're dealing with our next generations. We're trying to teach them, and we can't teach them the same way. And we're having to water it down so that we're not, hurting their feelings. But these teachings are important. The same way the science and the data is important, And so as one of those displaced youth, that's another issue we face because of these targeted communities. We have over 300 kids in our Puyallup tribal foster system alone. And those are numbers from maybe 5-7 years ago. And only about maybe 150 at the time were even in state. And that is, they're out of reach. I was one of those kids as well. And thankfully my mom came back to us, you know, and we fought our way to get back, but we had to fight. And then there are all of these systems and generational cycles that are put into our families on purpose. On purpose. And then you come to now, fast forward, after all of those things are in place, and we're doing it to ourselves. And then there's people who are like-minded. You know, we're all somebody in each of our communities that is going against the grain. That is deciding to open your eyes and say, you know, I see these cycles, I see what they're forcing upon us, and I don't want it anymore. And I don't want my kids to live suffering like this. But it's not everybody. And that's the same thing that we face in our communities. So then you have to, you know, deal with the getting gas out, you know, being depleted. For us, you know, we may not be everywhere, but we are. You know, we go from environmental justice to social justice to some days the youth call us and they're like, hey, can you just come sit with us? Can you come visit with us? You know, they want somebody to care. We don't have enough people. You know, I was telling Dakota just a few weeks ago, we want leaders, we want healers, we want medicine men, we want youth that stand up, we want voices, we want, you know, every category to be covered. But we don't have every category covered yet. So that means we have to cover every category until we get somebody to fill in for us. So that's also something that we face. And then having to go through real life experiences of what do we need to learn, you know, and then dealing with our own trauma of seeing these kids, and that opens our wounds for us. So having to learn how to deal with your unhealed child while helping unhealed children and creating a safe space for them. And that's the other difficulty, finding safe spaces in a targeted community. And we're so grateful that 350 has become a safe space. But then you also have to heal that trauma to get these youth to trust new adults, or to be able to trust somebody enough to step away from that trauma, or to realize, you know, I'm uncomfortable because that is trauma I was living in. You know, so we become counselors, we become mentors, we become that lost, hurt child that we used to be to find what they need, you know, and having to be so many different categories is their plan. You know, having one black sheep that has to go against the grain to say, hey, you deserve better. I want better for you. I love you enough, even though I don't know you, you know, to call them home. And so because of a lot of these systems, a lot of, you know, these plans, even the politicians, we have a lot of politicians in our tribe. We don't have a lot of tribal members anymore. We have a lot of politicians. We have a lot of Facebook warriors, you know. And I was always taught, and this is, again, what sent me into my work. If you're going to bring an issue, you better make sure you bring at least one solution with you. Yep. Even if it's not the perfect, even if it's not the one chosen, at least try to train your mind to look for the solution in the problem. Don't always be a complainer. Find solutions. Be a part of the solution. And so I took that, and seeing that, you know, we have to walk in this world and walk in that world and walk in this world. I grew up in non-Indigenous communities. I grew up in Spokane for a big part of my life after I was taken away from my culture. So I was forced to learn to walk in another world. I was forced to learn how to wear a different hat, how to get those questions all the time. And my last name is Gonzalez Montañez. You know, and in school, you have to use your full name. And I don't now, just because it's long to sign and most people don't make the line long enough. But having to be a native at heart and not knowing anything else, going into this other world of non-Indigenous people completely, to a non-Indigenous school where they don't even know that natives still exist. But my last name is Gonzalez Montañez. And so they think that every one of the 5 Mexicans in the school are related. And so I'm being judged as a Mexican American while grieving my native side, while learning to walk in this new world. You know, so that's also another struggle of displaced youth. Mm-hmm. While sometimes we lose our parents, we lose our family, an entire family, you know. Right. You see all the jokes that we have lists and lists and lists of cousins, and that's true. And we grow up that our cousins are our brothers and sisters. So imagine being ripped basically away from your whole group home of a family, you know, and then having to go through these. And my story was not even close to the worst story there was. My mom's story was way worse than mine in a time where they didn't care. Her case was actually one of the cases that helped push ICW into law because her story was so traumatizing. And she was left to fend for herself. We were adopted into, you know, Squaxin because she was left there. You know, so our stories for generations and generations go through these trauma that I could go on for days. But we've always said, you know, for us, this is an everyday battle. You know, I haven't been really present in a lot of events in the last few months because my daughter, who's 10 years old, was diagnosed with PTSD. You know, my youngest, Donnie, he also, from his mother, who's my sister, has a lot of trauma as well, from domestic violence to substance abuse to all of these different things. And she's now getting healing, and we're so grateful for that. But it's been a 13-year-long battle, you know, so there's so much trauma. There's so much, you know, pain to go through. And I always say for my kids, I hope and I pray to Creator that they see and they feel before it gets to that point of being incarcerated, doing things that you can't come back from, to know that that was trauma that I was feeling. I wasn't a horrible person. It wasn't, you know, it was trauma. And that's the biggest battle that we face with these kids because we live in a society that wasn't built for us. That's actively being built against our will. And now our people, a lot of our leaders that we look to like, hey, they're going to have our back. They don't. They're treating us the same as these people do. These tables that they sit at. It's so traumatizing to say, hey, you should care about this, and this is damaging to all of us. And then they say, yeah, I agree. Let me go fight for it at the table. And then they get up to the table and they don't even talk about it. They don't even raise their hand to agree or disagree. And it comes out, and people get depleted with that. It's the same as, you know, the federal government and in the state and in these city council meetings, everywhere we go where we're talking at them and they don't care. They're, you know, in their phones. It's these issues that I'm to the point where I've gotten down to the basics of you care no matter what, or you only care if it affects you. And that mentality for me is no longer acceptable. Like I said, you know, I've been absent for a while because of my children, but also because I lost one of my uncles in Mexico recently. And I wasn't able to be there. But then I also lost a foster brother here to these exact targeted areas, to substance abuse. And he was getting better. But he lived a long life of, you know, being lost. And through that, that was my nephew's uncle. So my nephew was also having suicidal tendencies. His mom is getting better, but he feels alone. So, you know, we have been going through so many different areas where it's just painful. And this has all been, and that's not everything, because we've also lost multiple young ones in the community. We've had teachers exposed for inappropriate behavior, substance abuse. Parents right now are fearing for their children's lives more than ever. In the society that wasn't built for us, and also in the one that's supposed to be. So, you know, we've really been having, I always tell everybody when it comes to pain and chaos, we're always taught to go back to the basics. So that's what I've been doing with the kids, going back to the basics. And, you know, speaking about the whole LNG fight, I just wanted to touch on that a little bit too, about what that looks for us today, what that looks like for us today. And it's been, you know, a really long fight. And again, with that fight too, we've gone through a lot of the same battles, the science, the data, but also the real life experience, the real life heartache, the people who have lost their lives. You know, there's been so many things in between every movement that we have to put our hat on and go deal with. But one of the most beautiful things that has come out of that we still to this day are so grateful for, that I still, you know, take my kids to, is right across the way. I don't know if everybody knows about the ceremonial grounds that we started doing ceremonies at. Dakota did his fast there. I believe it was 7 days, if I'm not mistaken. We planned for 7, but it was kind of in and out throughout the whole ceremony. But that land, when we got there, it was just like there was no life, is what it felt like. There was no breathing of the water. It just didn't feel like a real piece of land. And so we went there, we did the ceremony, and then we closed it out. And we continued to go back there, the kids actually went back there in the summertime and planted trees there. We go back there regularly when, like I said, when we feel chaotic, when we feel painful, when we feel hurt, we take that to the water. We go back to that basic teaching of letting it go the best way we know how. So we've done more ceremonies there. We've done more offerings. We actually plan to go do one today. And so in the process of doing that, I've noticed that every single time we went back there, there's new life. And for the longest time, when we would go there, whether the tide would be low or high, there would be this little piece of land just right next door that would at first it was just like the tiniest little circle, would just peekaboo real quick. And it seemed to be always after we offered prayers. And so then we were just kind of like, oh, ha, that's funny, Creator's just showing us like we're where we need to be. And there was no birds, there was no like small little critters. The plants didn't really look like they were like really thriving, like they had what they needed. And now you go back there, there's like every different species of birds. I've seen 7 eagles there at once when I went there. There's been feathers that have been left there. There's been somebody even felt the need to bury their dog there. And we were like, that's kind of weird, but they felt like this was a safe enough place to let go of their friend, and that was beautiful. It was an offering, We also found a porcupine, which signifies like really strong warrior medicine, and we processed that. We didn't, have anything to do with it, but we found it, and that was our teaching. You honor every piece of that animal. We brought it back to the ceremonial grounds and we buried it there. And we went back there maybe 2 months later to water the trees, to give offerings, and we went back, and that porcupine, mind you, there's no coyotes, there's no anything out there. People don't take their dogs, nothing. But it was gone. It wasn't buried there anymore. And it was almost like, to me, I just felt like, oh, it wanted to be here. It was happy to be here. And I just pictured it kind of crawling into the water, I'm off. I'm going to live a new life. But there was also a beehive that all the way down the walkway and underground is built in there. And it comes every summer now. And this was in a time where we were fighting for the bees and bees were extinct and we didn't see underground beehives anywhere in Tacoma at all. So, there's just a lot of life, a lot of sacred life that has come there. And the grass is growing again. The bushes are just overgrowing, There's people that go down there to cut it just so that they can walk through. There's people that go down there besides us that go down there and clean it up out of nowhere. Like no recognition, no anything. They just pick up what they can and they get it out of there. It's been cleaner, it's been livelier. It's a place that the kids love to go to. There's eagle feathers dropping now. There's, baby ducks, and just that land that used to peek through. I used to joke around that, one day that's going to be a huge piece of land that we're going to take over and we're going to do events there. And, we're going to just flip the bird to LNG. Yay. And every time we've gone back there, it's been more and more land. Now when we go back there, it's probably about as big as this space. And I've noticed that it doesn't go away. Now if it does kind of get submerged, it keeps that little circle that first appeared. So it's like Creator's honoring us by giving back that land. And it's just, if most of you have seen it, it's just this tiny little piece of land that you wouldn't even think to go to. You wouldn't think anything of it. But to me, it just feels like this little altar right on top of the water. And, it's given us a place to be called home to. And for here in Puyallup, that's a huge thing because we don't have anywhere to go anymore. They've sold off all of our places or taken them from us. The only place that we have to go that even resembles like a mountain area or a place that we would go to pray is Swan Creek. That's the only part, that little bottom part is the only piece that's on our reservation. and it's not even ours, you know. So that was the one place for the longest time, and nobody felt safe to go there because they constantly push homeless people and, you know, displaced people. They push them there on purpose because they know that's the only place we have left. So this isn't a place that everybody has been exposed to yet, but hopefully as it gets bigger, you know, I do offer it to our medicine men. And the most beautiful story, I just have to say real quick, speaking of good medicine, you know, one of the most beautiful stories is we recently went back there. You know, I said my daughter was diagnosed with PTSD. We did a cleansing ceremony for her down there with one of the trees that they planted down there. And this medicine man, he comes down and he's asking us about this place because he wanted, again, a safe place to do a ceremony, and we don't have many. So we could have went up to the mountains, but we didn't have time to. So I told him about this little piece, and he goes, "Oh wow, they planted that tree. We need to go there. That's the place we need to be. You know, that's calling us there." So we go there, and he's asking me about, you know, basically like how did we come about this land? And I'm telling him, and you can just tell, you know, he's like, wow, just in awe. Like, this is a very spiritual place, especially because we took it back. And this space was under the water. So this wasn't a piece of land that was even supposed to be there. So when we're talking about this entire story, I'm telling him about in the same year that all of this happened, the ceremonies, us finding this land, we were harvesting. And I found camas up on one of our old military, or it's military road, but it's one of our old like Indian highways, they would call it. And that's where one of our camas harvesting spots is. And something told me, bring 3 home. We need more medicine at home. And so I just started digging them up. So I took 3 with everything intact, and I planted 1 at my home, and I planted 1 at the youth center, and then I planted 1, I believe, at Swan Creek. And I didn't think anything of it, and this was in about 2018. And so I'm telling him, you know, all of the things that we were doing in that year to just bring medicine back to the community and to the youth and to the people. And I told him how just last year, the camas in my yard finally bloomed out of nowhere, you know, and it wasn't even in season. We were going, I have a little push mower just to keep us active. And me and my kids were, you know, cutting the lawn, and out of nowhere, they're like, "Mom, what's that purple flower?" I'm like, "What are you talking about? We don't have any flowers in the middle of the yard." Sure enough, it was that camas strong, and it only stayed for maybe 2 days, and then it went back down. And I was telling him about this story and how, you know, it just was such a powerful moment for me. And he goes, "You planted 1 at the youth center too?" And I said, "Yeah, I planted 1 just to, you know, try to help get more in those social spaces that we carry." And he goes, that's the camas that I give my offerings to when I come here. He goes, that's the plant on that space. He goes, "I saw it and I knew that it was special and that it was sacred." He goes, that's my safe space to give my offerings to as a medicine man." He was like, "You gave me a safe space. Thank you." And so for me, it was like a full circle, you know, all of those prayers and plans that we put to bring medicine back into the community. And I thought, hey, maybe if a kid sees it, you know, and gets good feeling and, hey, what's this? And it's an education moment. But never in my life did I think, hey, a medicine man would bring healing to our community, and this would be like almost like his beacon here, you know. And so that all of the things that we did in that time, like, it was about stopping LNG and PSC and costing them as much money as we could and delaying them as much as we could. But it was also about bringing a community to us, to our people, the healing, giving our people a way back to that basic prayer, that basic safe space. You know, spaces like this are so important for us because, like that point that I said earlier about, you know, the black sheep being one out of how many different communities, you know. And for me, Donnie, he's our little mixed baby. He's got a sister who's also mixed. My nephew's mixed. We're all mixed with something of almost every different community. So being the foster parent, the auntie, the mom, I took it on myself that it's my job to bring them to these spaces to learn about each side of their history. If I don't know, I'm going to go find somebody that knows, because I want them to feel like they belong. That is what we learn is the first step of kind of dismantling the trauma, is making sure you know where you belong, whether that be at your home, with your family, or with this family. You know, it's so important for us to have like-minded people to keep us going, because it really does get hard, and especially when we deal with deaths all the time. We deal with trauma, and you know, even with people like my sister, she is not gone, thankfully, and I'm so grateful for that. But I have watched her kill herself for over 13 years. And there are a lot of services for people who are lost, but there's not a lot of healing for the families that go through that, or for the caretakers, you know, of many different situations, whether it be death, illness, you know, lost people, whatever way that is. There's not a lot of healing for that. And that comes from this, from community. You know, I can preach over there to my community, but it's you guys who really give me that backup. It's you guys who really reassure us that we're in the right space, that we're moving together for all of our communities. Because just again, to bring that to what that looks like in a like real life experience for us. When we first started the Water Warriors, you know, police brutality was really, really bad against us, but nobody knew. Because speaking again about data, I mean, people know, but like, you know, the exact situations that we were specifically going through, people didn't know, because we don't talk to people a lot in other communities, or to police, or even with our tribal police, you know. There's not a lot of real data, you know, and Gemini touched on that. You can't go through the Black community, the Native community, the Filipino community, the non-Indigenous, and really get down to what does the air do to you? Right. You know, what do these things do to you? Because a lot of it is on purpose. Mm-hmm. And that translates into many different categories, which brings me to my example. When we first started Water Warriors, you know, there was a lot of anger and hatred towards us in the city. A city that we donate money to, that we are a part of, that, you know, our land is here. And so whenever we would try to stand up on our own, we would get pushed out. We would get, you know, any type of treatment that would just get us the hell out of there or block us before it even started, even from our own politicians. And so one thing that we had talked about pretty recent, around the time that Dakota had got arrested, I think it might have been an event that day or the day before, where we had actually exercised this, but it was a lot of our non-Indigenous allies that they decided, like, we're going to put a circle around you guys. So when things get heated up, when we're in those moments and they want to arrest us, we could all get arrested. That's fine. But we're going to put a circle in front of you. We're going to put a line in front of you, and we're going to protect you, so that they treat us differently. You know, and this was something that was offered to us. And it was just a beautiful moment of solidarity, where we acknowledged what each community was going through in a moment. And we found the best way through that. And we earned trust with them. They earned trust with us. And it was a family. It was like that moment where we kind of knew, like, okay, this is above just doing events together. There are people here who are really ready to protect us. And in spaces where our own community doesn't do that. You know, and I'm not saying that everybody has to put their body in front of somebody else to show solidarity, but for that mindset to come through, like, it's basically all of us or none of us, is kind of what we felt, which is one of our teachings when we go on the canoe. You have one heart and one mind, and we all have to move together or nothing works. Our canoe won't get anywhere. You know, so those moments where we all can acknowledge our hardships and our roadblocks and our strengths, and put ourselves, you know, in danger for somebody else, was such an eye-opening moment for me, that I think that it really cemented, you know, the trust that we all have going into these groups. It healed us, basically, you know, is what I'm trying to get at. It healed our trust, our spirit, and our mentality towards people and communities on the outside, because a lot of our communities are very, you know, just not opening to cops, to government officials, to even people who want to do census and datas. You know, our elders were recently talking about how they used to all lie. Like, those census and everything, they're like, don't listen to those, because I used to say that kid was my kid. She used to say, you know, because they didn't want people to know where their bloodlines came from. That's how they were targeted. Right. So even a lot of this old school information, we have to get down to the fact of they didn't trust everybody. Yep. And it was rightfully so, you know. So that was, I